The Ukrainians are going to be in a position now to potentially launch either a new eastern offensive.
Still ahead, how Ukraine is pushing back on Russia's advance. We're going to take a look at what could be a turning point for Ukraine. Explosions ripped through an ammunition depot in Crimea today at a Russian military base. Ukraine has hinted that it is responsible. This seems the latest example of a robust Ukrainian pushback and maybe a new moment in this war. Not only has Ukraine's military struck deep in Russian-held territory, a major counteroffensive is said to be in the works. So Terence McKenna gives us a close-up look at what may be a turning point.
In the first phase of Russia's latest attack on Ukraine, Russian tanks poured over the border on February 24th and made a beeline for the capital, Kyiv. They quickly got caught in a traffic jam on the main southbound highway and became easy prey for the Ukrainian defense forces. The Russians lost hundreds of tanks, picked off by U.S.-supplied Javelin missiles and other weapons. The countryside became littered with destroyed Russian tanks, and the attack on Kyiv was abandoned. Then came phase 2, as the Russians poured in artillery and rocket fire, which destroyed cities and towns and killed hundreds of Ukrainian civilians. The Russians were able to advance especially in the eastern Donbass region and drive south through Mariupol to establish their land bridge to Crimea. They also pushed north from Crimea through Kherson, the largest Ukrainian city they captured. Now Kherson has become the focus of the third phase of the battle, as Ukrainians push to retake the city. In recent weeks, they have been able to roll back the Russian advance.
Slava Ukraina! Slava Ukraina!
British Member of Parliament Bob Seeley is a former soldier who recently visited southern Ukraine.
Whilst Russia can win the battle of artillery, the Ukrainians are going to be in a position now to potentially launch either a new eastern offensive or potentially a new southern offensive. And if they succeed in doing that, it may break the Russian positions.
Fire! This is the weapon that has made the biggest impact in turning the tide. The U.S.-supplied High-Mobility Artillery Rocket System, or HIMARS. It is better than anything the Russians have and can hit targets with pinpoint accuracy at a range of up to 85 kilometers. This was the moment the Ukrainians first deployed the weapon. And this was the moment recorded deep in Russian territory as HIMARS rockets destroyed a Russian ammunition depot. Other targets have been hit as well.
Very specific hits on railway junctions and bridges, so critical bits of infrastructure that will prevent the Russians from reinforcing. And secondly, command and control points as well. The Ukrainians probably rightly say they don't have enough of the long-range artillery systems, but they have enough to destroy significant targets, or high-value targets.
The Russians appointed their own officials to run the occupied city of Kherson and announced there would be a referendum there about joining the Russian Federation. Then the Russian-appointed officials were targeted by snipers and started dying in car explosions, indicating a substantial Ukrainian resistance movement in the city. In the nearby strategic Black Sea port of Odessa, Hannah Shelest is a Ukrainian political analyst.
Just 2 days ago, one of the deputy heads of the local administration appointed by Russians being killed from the rifle and died in the hospital. We saw explosions not only of the cars, but just on the roads. We saw the rifle killings of the police, or so-called police of the Russians that brought there. So it seems to me, at least by the news that we received, there are more and more cases of these.
The Ukraine military has broadcast videos of its soldiers fighting near Kherson.
Вони по селах б'ють ракетами. Кожне село, яке тут рядом є, в центр. Школа, дитсадочок. 10 днів все горить. Вони гатять і гатять і гатять. І нема такої якоїсь системи або якоїсь логіки.
There's a lot of political risk in this whole thing, which is one reason why Ukraine really needs to crack open Kherson and close the water to Crimea again.
Glenn Grant is another former British soldier who is now a military advisor to the government of Ukraine. When I met him in Riga, Latvia, he said that Ukraine is under great pressure to show some progress to justify the massive amounts of military support from Western nations and to counter Putin's rationale for the war.
If you attack in the south and you cut the bridge to Crimea, then the whole of the argument unravels. Mm-hmm. And which is why I think that they've got to do it, and they need to do it quickly.
A few days ago, the Ukrainians were clearly able to make some direct hits on a Russian airbase deep in Crimean territory, destroying many Russian aircraft. It caused a panic among Russian tourists in Crimea, and a 100-mile traffic jam of tourists fleeing the area. Some seemed oblivious that a war was going on. And now this latest strike in Crimea, this time an ammunition depot near a Russian military base. Meanwhile, Western planes are constantly landing at Rzeszów Airport in southern Poland and unloading massive amounts of new weapons and ammunitions for Ukraine. Grateful as they are, the Ukrainians say they need much more.
The bigger amount, better quality and quicker supply that we receive, the quicker we can start the certain counter-offense, the shorter can be this war. Because when you give these weapons by drops, definitely you're just prolonging the war.
When the HIMARS systems were supplied to Ukraine, the United States reportedly made the Ukrainians promise that they would not be used to fire across the Russian border for fear of a major escalation of the war.
You can't win a war with one hand behind your back. Russia has the initiative, and you have to take that initiative away from them. And if they fire at you from across their border, they must know they're going to die when that happens. Otherwise, they'll just keep doing it, won't they?
On August 8th, the United States announced another $1 billion of military aid for Ukraine, including more HIMARS rockets and 75,000 more rounds for the M777 artillery guns, which have also been supplied by Canada and Australia. Poland and the Czech Republic have provided Ukraine with hundreds of T-72 tanks. Still, the war is taking a very heavy toll on Ukraine. Tens of thousands, civilians and soldiers, have already died. About 14 million have been driven from their homes. Another 13 million are at physical risk in areas under constant or sporadic shelling. The Ukrainian economy is expected to be cut in half. Unemployment could reach 30%. If the war ended today, the reconstruction costs could hit $1 trillion without a clear indication of where that money could come from. All these numbers will get worse as the war drags on. Ukrainians are naturally worried that the Western politicians and public will tire of this war and put pressure on Ukraine to trade their occupied lands for a peace deal.
Well, Ukraine perfectly understands that somebody can be tired from the Ukrainian war. We don't have a right to be tired, or we don't have this privilege to be tired from this war. And for us, that is not territory, that is people, first of all. Because when you saw atrocities in Bucha and Irpin, when we know that the same atrocities are now happening in Kherson region, we are not liberating the territory. It's not about 500 kilometers of the land. We are liberating those people that are under the war crimes of the Russian military.
The Ukrainians are fighting for their country because they believe that they have a right to a state. They're willing to fight, and many of them are willing to die for that. It's up to the Ukrainians how long they want to fight for and how much damage they're willing to endure. And I suspect that actually the answer is that a lot of them are willing to endure a great deal of damage because if they don't fight, that's the end of the Ukrainian state for another 50 to 100 years.
Russia has responded to reports of a coming Ukrainian counteroffensive by moving thousands of soldiers and weapons to reinforce its position in the south. It seems to be becoming a war of attrition to see which side is able to sustain mass casualties for the longest time. Terence McKenna, CBC News, Riga.